Okay, I said I would do a quick little recap on some Agile New England history. And so what I'll say is just a thumbnail sketch of how we got to where we are now. Um, the group was formed in 2002, and this was as a result of a call that Ken Schwaber put out at the time. He emailed several area people that he knew were, involved in agile software development, and he was a member of the Agile Alliance board at the time. And he said that the Agile Alliance wanted there to be local groups, interested in Agile. So he rented a space at a hotel and he just put out a general invitation to as many people as he knew. And I think something like 8 people showed up. Myself, Ken. That was the first time I met Jeff Sutherland. He came, and Ron Morscato, and about 3 or 4 other folks who were active in the early meetings we had. And we just talked about things that we thought needed doing. So the next step was, let's get together regularly. And we didn't have a space. We didn't really know just what to do. And I said, well, maybe we could get room at the Soft Pro bookstore. Remember that one in Burlington? And so for a few months, they let us just have a circle of chairs in the back of the bookstore, because that was be what they did whenever an author was visiting and giving a talk about a book. And so that was great, but we didn't really have a format. We just had a free-flowing conversation, and it was a lot of fun. After that, for a time, we met at someone's business. That was one of the fellows who was there at the first meeting. And next for some years, we weren't renting, we were just had donated a classroom at Tufts University. One of our volunteers had a connection there. I remember Johanna being a speaker one time back then. Yeah. And we used to just pass a hat, to get some money for pizza. And there was a pizza place across the street. So it was pretty, what would you call, low maintenance kind of an organization. And then around 2009, I believe, that's when we became an ACM chapter. One of our volunteers was, very active in the local ACM. And there were plenty of advantages to doing that if we wanted to hold bigger events. And since then, we started to grow. We started to have very large meetings around that time, a little before then. And, I think maybe it was 2010, we began videoing our meetings, in response to a suggestion from a volunteer. So the rest is history, as they say. We began having more of a set format each night, and we always kept it free. We always kept it open to everybody, and I'm glad of that. And we always kept it not tied to any one job role or any one agile practice. And so that's the end of my little synopsis.
Awesome. Thank you, Nancy. And since we've met you, Nancy, we'd like to meet the rest of the panelists. So I'm going to ask everyone just to introduce themselves very briefly and tell us, how you ended up here on Nancy's famous list, and what you'd like everyone to know about you. And then we can get started on some burning questions. So Nancy, who would you like to toss it to for an intro?
I'll toss it to Damon, because
All right.
he was active when I was in the structure of the group.
It's interesting. I didn't know any of that history up until the ACM thing, but I do remember. So I got involved actually in 2005, 2006, because the company I was at the time, AccuRev, was getting pummeled by this Agile thing. People didn't want to buy new tools. They wanted to be more Agile. So I had to figure that out. So I thought, oh, let me find some people in the Agile space. And so Nancy was a person, and some of you may remember Michael de la Maza was another person. And there was nobody. I couldn't find anybody. So I started showing up to these meetings, and where they were meeting, where Agile New England was meeting then, was actually at MIT.
Yeah. We had that for a while too.
Mm-hmm. And I'm not going to go into this history. This was a big thing for me to not talk about this, but it used to be called Agile Bazaar.
That's right.
And that was one thing I'll take credit for, was hey, we got to change that name. because the first 5 minutes of any conversation was, what is Agile Bazaar? Oh, you know, like the cathedral in Bazaar. Oh, what's that? Okay. Right. So it was a wonderful idea, but it was a little distracting. So we, you know, I don't take credit for the name change, but Agile New England came from that. So that's some of my memories there of how it got started. And yeah, I remember it was pretty small, and then there was sort of a, I don't know, like an inflection point, and then all of a sudden it just went whoosh. It's amazing. We really had a great team. A lot of the people that are here, some people that are not here. So it was a great experience.
Awesome. Thanks, Stephen. And who would you like to toss it to?
Well, let's see. I think let's go on my screen. It would be Johanna.
Okay, so I'm not sure how many of you actually know me, but I used to go to all the meetings almost all the time. And I finally said, I'm traveling too much for this. I got to stay home when I'm not speaking. So I pulled up my PowerPoint from the 2005 Agile Bazaar talk, because I wanted to see what my tips were. And I had 9 tips, which were daily builds, automated smoke tests, implement by slice, test early and often, time box requirements work, because even then people were, you know, backlogs, nuts. Rank the requirements, which it means 1, 2, 3. Rolling wave planning, define milestones based on deliverables, not functions, and create cross-functional project teams. That's what I talked about in 2005. I suspect that many of you would love to be able to do that now. So yeah, so I've been around a while, and I take more of a leadership perspective than a code-centric perspective. And I will toss it to Mike.
Okay. Do I switch? I'm sorry. I'm a lot when it gets to this Zoom.
I think you're good.
You're
All right,
just
I think
fine.
I'm good.
have
I'm
to do
all right.
anything.
If you say
Just
so,
stop.
if we also, so my journey into A&E began, as Nancy said, with that meeting, but I think my real connection was walking to SoftPro, and for some reason, all the right people were there. And I suddenly realized this guy, Ken Schwaber, that had been talking, I had worked with it in another universe. And I said, you know, this guy's doing what I thought we were going to do. And I'm going to say a Wang Labs. And I suddenly found I was home. I'd spent most of my career doing these kinds of things very poorly. And when I got into this, the Agile framework, the manifesto, the Scrum book, the Scrum framework, I just felt like I can live here, and I've been living here ever since. So, and I do remember going to a pizza joint off Route 9 at the Mass Pike.
That's right. We were meeting at the Pizzeria Uno there for a time too. They had
That's right.
back room space that was good for about 50 people, but
Yeah.
we outgrew it.
The reason that most people would say, who's this guy and why is he called a founder, is because I got engaged. I started working and coaching. I was traveling. And when you're doing 40 weeks a year on the road, you usually miss the third Thursday. It just works that way. And but I've been able to keep up at some point with some of you, and it's great. I am retired. At least that's what I promised my wife. But I got into this question of followership. When we started this Agile thing, it was about us followers. And we were going to take back some of our power and do stuff. And that's always been in the back of my brain. And today I'm working on that almost subconsciously. But I think that we'll talk about it later, but I do think the next big thing for the Agile movement is to help the follower understand and retake back their power. Because if you read the manifesto, it's not about management. It's about a team of people who do things. So that's where I am. So who's left? I
That's
can't see-
it. You were we saved the best
No,
for last,
Chet.
Mike. That
Chet-
was you,
Chester.
right?
Wait a
Yeah.
minute.
Well, I think my experience with A&E is I got an email from Amy a few months ago inviting me to give a talk, and somehow it morphed into this panel,
It sure did.
which is okay with me, because I'm much better as a bomb thrower than I am the central person. Although I do a pretty good job when it's on me. I'd like to just amplify a little of what Mike just said. Is I often have to point out to people that it is the Agile Manifesto for software development, not the Agile Manifesto for people who manage software development. And as really a dyed in the wool XP person, the founding idea of extreme programming was make the world safe for programmers. And
Yeah.
that's where my passion is, and really has always been, no matter what I was doing to make a living. My passion is about people who do the work. As my friend Chief Paul Hill says, the makers, the making, and the made. And that's kind of why we're doing all of this, is to allow people who do the work the freedom to do it as well as they can, and to protect them from the things that traditionally causes them grief, like managers who tell them when they're going to be done with some work that the manager doesn't understand a bit of. So.
Yeah, thanks for that. I really appreciate you saying that, because I think that's something we definitely want to hear from all of you tonight who have been in this game for quite a long time, is how Agile has changed over the last 20 years and where do you see it going? Because I think it's been weaponized quite a bit, and I know that wasn't the original intent. So I would love to hear some of the thoughts from the panel, and we can start with you, Chet, since we ended with you. Let's start with you this time, and talk to us a little bit about that over the history of Agile from the time you started in it till now. What have you seen change in the way that people view or think about Agile? And then what do you think is next for Agile? Because I keep hearing that Agile's going to die and Agile is dying. So what do you think about all that?
I am causing a bit of a stir right now on Mastodon, which is where I have moved from the FOWL site, as we now call it, FOWL site, to Mastodon, to the Agile Alliance for instance. If you want to join Mastodon, agilealliance.social. And so I was suggested, I think yesterday, that we go back to calling it lightweight. That Agile has lost all meaning, and we have processes out there that
Boy, did you just date yourself?
I've been around since day zero, and I'm the guy who said let's hire Kent Beck. So I remember when the decision was made, let's call it Agile, and that seemed like a cool idea. But Agile has lost all meaning, and now we have processes that are by no definition Agile, gaining great space in the market, when in fact there's nothing Agile about what they're doing. Now, one of the things I have been doing is reflecting on the past 26 and a half, nearly 27 years that I've been involved in this, and thinking about some of the things I wish we had done differently. And I won't go back to the name, although there are days when I suggest we change the name to herpes, because you really have to want to do it to say we got to get to some of that herpes, but that's another conversation. But I think one of the things that we did that we should not have done was we told people what we thought the answer was. I remember one of the questions, there's some questions on the list that was floating around about framework. Framework was a completely wrong idea. We gave people an answer and we should have taught them how to find the answer that was correct for them. Don't give them, you don't give a man a fish, you teach him how to fish. You don't give a company a framework, you teach them how to discover how to do the work the way it needs to work in their particular context, because we all know context matters an awful lot. I think that's something we did wrong. We thought we discovered something really cool, and what we really discovered was a way to get to something cool and teach people how to find their own path. I think another thing we did wrong, certainly in the world of extreme programming, was we denied it was hard. When we first started teaching people about XP, they would say, oh, but you got to have really good programmers to do this, and you have to know lots of stuff. And we said, oh, no, we're just a bunch of guys, and we just, we can do it, you can do it. It turns out that wasn't true. We were extraordinary because we had spent a great deal of time learning how to do the things we had to do. We didn't walk in cold. We had spent months and months learning object-oriented programming and modeling and design and all these things that we had in our fingertips. And we still have in our fingertips, those of us who've been doing it a long time. And to believe that somebody who has none of that background can be successful was a mistake. We should have told people, yes, this is really hard. You're going to have to figure out how to do stuff. But it turns out that even if you don't figure out how to do those things, you're going to be unsuccessful, whatever process you follow. And I think those things matter. And I'm sorry we got that wrong.
I would like to add something to that. And Chet, I am disappointed that XP is not the primary agile software development approach, because I think XP is far superior to almost anything else we have out there. But I think that you guys made a very big mistake by not including leadership at all in the Agile Manifesto for software development, because leadership decides on the culture of the organization by means of what they reward. And I mean, maybe you have a whole lot more experience with successful teams, but I cannot count the number of teams who are able to do a little bit of the agile thing, and then the management comes in and screws up everything with their demands for predictability, their demands for certain rewards. And because there's nothing in the Agile Manifesto for software development about leadership and management and culture, I think that we have a very difficult time helping the teams and the leaders and everybody understand what agility really means.
So I agree.
To be fair, though, I guess they didn't do a lot of big upfront thinking about all of this. To be fair, I think they did what made sense at, with the information at the time, and maybe the drinking and skiing had something to do with it as well. Sort of my thought here is, I think the biggest problem with Agile right now is I don't think it's actually changed at all. And this is going to sound like I'm arguing against Chet, which I'm not. I think actually Agile is very easy to do. The problem is, like, here's my description of Agile. It's just one description of Agile. I'm simplifying. You take your organization, you break it up into missions from the very top to the smallest mission, where each mission is value add, and it can be done by a small group. And then you leave that group of, I guess, missionaries alone for, let's say, a week or 2 weeks to do whatever they need to do. You leave them alone. And the only check on them is to check from time to time that they're creating something of value. That's it. That's easy. The problem is getting to that. And yes, the technical side is important. I'm not dismissing that. But getting to that is so hard, because the distance from where people are to that is gigantic. I count myself lucky that I happen to be in a small software company and I had a very XP experience. And I was like, oh, this is normal. No, it's really not normal. So there's a thought.
I'd like to chime in and say, I'm going to agree with something Chet said. To me, early on, Agile, I mean, this was before it got called that, before the manifesto or anything. But I needed a way to keep managers out of our hair as a software team, okay? And later on, when I heard and read about extreme programming, I really liked it. It made sense. But, you know, it's funny, you're reflecting on this idea of having told people you have the answer and here's what it is, and that's the wrong thing. I didn't have that experience, and that's a good thing. I had an experience where, as a team of independent contractors, we were working on a project together, kind of camped at a site, but not micromanaged. And the main thing is the team lead just wanted to help us work more as a team. And he simply proposed that we test as we go, and that we do some sort of data hiding to make it seem like we're using C++, which we couldn't use for various tech reasons. We had to use C. This was an embedded systems problem, medical device thing we were working on. And the fact that we started incrementally testing as we went, and we preserved those tests and made them runnable. I mean, they were crappy, but it was a start. That really made a huge difference. And once we saw that, we started cascading more changes. And then I was looking for a way to do this in a better environment where it wasn't all contractors. And I managed to find an opportunity where we had a clean start design. So we didn't have, like Damon said, we didn't have to dig our way out of a deep hole of tech debt and garbage code. We were building it fresh, but I knew what things to avoid, you know, building a brand new project. So that was a long thing, but we were doing sprints and all this kind of thing. We didn't call it sprints, but I mean, we were doing very much of XP for about 1.5 years before the book came out from Kent Beck. And then when we read that, we said, oh my God, there's other people doing almost the same thing. Wow. And so, you know, I mean, this was in 2000. And like in the next year or two, I met Ward Cunningham at a conference. And one of the things that sticks with me is he was so patient explaining, because I had a bunch of questions. A lot of people by that point were bashing extreme programming, saying, oh, well, that was on a failed project and blah, blah, and this and that happened. And I thought, really, is that true? I don't know. And
I certainly got paychecks out of it.
Well, he explained.
The system wrote paychecks for me and 10,000 other people.
Yeah, he explained to me what went on with the prior and how Kent got hired and how you guys worked together. And I thought, oh, now I get it. Yeah, I can see why people would get the wrong idea, because there's a lot of ways to get wrong ideas from what me and my team were doing. But, you know, we had that experience of discovering it for ourselves. And that's why I guess I always knew from the get-go that that's really key. You got to make a space for people to discover for themselves what they need to do. And I think that's why the mob programming thing later on, when it came around, resonated pretty strongly with me.
Well, let me let you in on a little secret that a lot of people don't know.
Did all those paychecks bounce?
No, they did not. They did not. But actually, I had direct deposit, but that's another thing. When we started over, because we crashed before Kent came along. We worked for 14 months and had something that didn't work, and we threw it away and started again, which is always good advice. You should start again. But our big boss, you know, the guy I worked for that had an office with a door and reported to the CIO, came to us and said, I don't care whether you write a payroll system or not. I want you to learn how to build software correctly. And that was our mission. We just used this project to do that. Now, it turns out that after we did that, nobody at the company listened to us, which is, that's
Typical.
I think somebody once said something about a prophet in their own land, I believe. You can probably find that somewhere if you look. I think it's in some well-known book. But I think we did an excellent job of that. And on that dimension, we were wildly successful.
You know, Chet, you were, and you set a I would say you set a stake in the ground, a reality stake, because all the other guys that I know who signed up on that manifesto were doing little bitty things, and there was the Usenet group and all that stuff was going on there. But you guys actually did something and proved that failure breeds success. And I think the one thing that I wish would come back into Agile is an outcome-driven model. We're here to build something that makes the customer happy so they buy the product and the company makes money. That's the train of thought I have. I have spent a lot of time on some of the groups that are trying to help young Scrum Masters and Agilists, and I got to tell you, I don't hear anybody talking about outcome. I'm going to say something that's probably going to upset a couple of my friends, maybe more, but that's me. I think we either solved the problem, we know what outcome is, we know how to deliver it, which I kind of doubt, or that we said it's too hard. So let's go talk about making people happy as a muddle about getting this stuff, trying to get this stuff done and not making progress. So I think that we got to retrench and go back in and say, we're here to deliver something that meets your current expectations and needs. Now, as far as the phony war between Scrum and Agile and XP and all this other stuff, I have been using Scrum as an umbrella to kind of organize the chaos, and drilled into them test first and XP as the machinery deliver. And I don't know anybody else that doesn't do the same. So we need to knock down this nonsense about, oh, you're XP, you're safe. Get the job done. Get her done.
Well, I don't think any project has ever failed because they delivered running software too frequently.
My apologies, I will interject a little bit because I am going to agree with what Mike has said about the outcome-driven model. I interviewed with one consulting firm a while ago where their model is really sprint goal, right? Every sprint, the customer pays for the outcome. They're not pre-estimating whatever that says, I'm going to do this in 10 or 2 sprints, something like that. They just say, you pay me every sprint.
Well, yeah, and that's Kent Beck's variable scope contract. I've actually written contracts like that. At the end of every sprint, here's what we've done. Do you want to do another one? And we to figure out what that one is. And if you don't like it, then you don't pay us, and we'll go off and do something else. So yeah, I think that's a very, very reasonable model to take. I think because it focuses on what it is we're trying to do. So
I'm not sure what we just beat to death, but it feels like we just beat something to death.
Well, thanks for coming, everybody. I'll go up.
Thanks. Dude, I was gonna say, I think everybody mentioned the manifesto at least once, and that was a question that I had. Was the manifesto? Well, it feels like the manifesto is kind of like the Bible, right? It's a done deal.
It's a base camp. It's a base camp.
It's the best ideas 17 guys had on one day, or actually 2 days.
So what about
that's all it was? It was 17 guys who had a who got together and wrote up something. It would have been a whole lot better had I decided to go. But for some reason, I decided not to go, and otherwise I'd have been, famous as opposed to just what I am, annoying.
Yeah, but do you ski?
I am what my wife refers to as a garage sale. You know what? You familiar with the skiing term garage sale?
No.
All your
But-
stuff goes flying.
Oh yeah, I go down the hill and I go and all my stuff is there strewn down the hill behind me. I'm like Charlie Brown pitching. I go down the hill and around. I'm standing there in my underwear. So yeah, I stopped skiing.
Amy, I wanted to try to bring this back to some form of semblance to what we're supposed to be doing, and mention that one of the things I think that if somebody wanted to really go back and make the manifesto and the principles more amenable, is that they have to break the small team mindset, which is a hammerlock on us progressing, and they got to bring in a business construct and an outcome process, because it was like very territorial, very siege mode in the beginning, being down in the bunker and many software projects, and the most hated person on most projects, because I was a test manager. I realized that I needed more business input and I needed less walls. I think the walls have come down, but I don't see business being integrated as part of us. And
I think it is in there though, if you
Yeah.
look. I think one of the problems is, folks that are sort of newer to it today aren't actually learning Agile. They're learning like the COVID version, right? So seriously, I'll relate to a conversation I heard recently, and it's not an unusual thing. I think is I was talking to a software company. It's been doing Agile for years, right? And so I came in to say, here are some things that we could look at doing. And somebody said, I'm sorry, I worked at 3 different companies doing Agile, so I think I know what I'm talking about. I've never seen this before. I don't know what you're talking about. And I was like, oh, well, that's really interesting. And at the same place, they have a 30-minute meeting, which is the combination. I'm not saying everybody does this, but as an example, there's variants. 30-minute meeting where they have sprint review, retro, and then the planning. And really it's just moving the sprint tags on the work that's going to be done in like a couple months. Right? That's what they're doing. So that, I think, is the thing that's winning, right? That's what's spreading around, stuff like that. And so when we come in and we say, actually, this is the thing, they go, well, I don't know what you're talking about. That seems like nonsense. And so my question for me anyway is, if that's really what's going on, what can we do to get in front of that, right? And just saying that that's not the way Agile works, apparently, that doesn't work too well. I don't know.
I think you're right with your position, Damon. We should just, or Chet, we should just change the name. Agile can be found anywhere from a car to Kleenex. I mean, it has no intrinsic value to progress. It's just like a marketing tomb right now.
Well, since my desire to move back to lightweight hasn't got over very well, maybe the next thing I'm going to float is no Jira.
Oh yeah, I could be in on that. I really think that part of it is we early on, right? So let's go back to 2000 and say, what problems were we trying to solve at that time? And one of the problems I was trying to solve is nobody invited me to Snowbird, or Rebecca Worsbrock, or Linda Rising, or Nancy, or any of the women who had been doing this for the last 10 to 15 years. It's entirely possible, Chet, that the men did not know who we were, except that I had many interesting dinners with Alistair at several conferences for years before this. So I think that when we don't have diverse teams, we end up with something that's suboptimal. We have seen this over and over and over again. However, I don't think that a change of name is that useful.
No,
I think that we need to understand that Agile is all about collaborative teams, right? When teams collaborate, and Nancy, we had a conversation in 98, 99 about that team that you were working with on the firmware or whatever, embedded software. And you actually asked me, did I know of anybody who would hire a team? Because the team was working so well, you wanted to move from where you were, or maybe they were firing all of you or something, to a new place that would allow you to collaborate as a team.
Yeah, I remember asking you that question, and it's not so much that the team wanted to go somewhere else, it's more that they were getting rid of us.
Yeah.
Because this way of working was a little too far, and it wasn't really because of Agile, it was that they brought us in, they went this way because they were trying to get into the commercial market. Once the military budgets came on, they were happy to go home to mama. And getting rid of our project was part of going home to mama. So that's long and short of it. But, I think this question about how do we get back? Because I think, Damon, you brought up a good question. How does Agile become Agile again? I think you have to look at the whole thing in a systems way. The software team, the tech people, that's a system, right? The company as a whole is a system, okay? So you got all this interactions, just like you do, anytime you put together technical systems too. And you have to look at it as a whole, and you have to understand what each needs and what each is going to deliver. Yeah, I'm just going to say, I think somebody who's doing some really constructive work on that question right now is Steve Denning. He's just put out his latest a book. It's called Reinventing Capitalism in the Digital Age. And it really talks about it that way. He even looks at organizations as they're like an immune system where there isn't just the IT part, there's all these other parts. But even if the IT system changes and it's successful, the rest of we've all seen it, the rest of the organization then fights to eject the outsider, the new invader. And you see that dynamic. But companies have successfully fought that. Of course, it takes understanding higher up in the organization. And, and he talks about that too. So that's the kind of thing I think we all need to learn more about. My orientation has always been more from the technical side of things because it's where I come from. But I've come to appreciate in many ways the steps that, other people in management go through as they discover their way forward. And I can't hand them the answers. All I can do is help them, help them with their steps, but I don't have answers to hand them.
Well, sometimes all we need are better questions.
You got it. That's exactly right. Exactly.
Just to give another shout out about Steve, I had the good fortune of seeing his film, The Age of Agile, a couple of months ago. And I don't know how one can go about seeing it today, but it is a very thought-provoking piece, looking at 3 or 4 different organizations who have radically changed how they go about doing stuff. Everything from I believe it is the Boston Ballet, all the way to the U.S. military. Changing things in order to respond to changing circumstances. So I think that's really good. One of the things I have to do in penance for my sins is I occasionally talk to Dave Snowden, if you know Dave. And it's always thought provoking and usually frustrating. But one of the things Dave has been talking about for a couple of years now is the rewilding of Agile. That we have fallen into this very small range of things that conform to what we believe Agile is. And we've lost the ability to discover new and better ideas. And I think that's part of the things that Damon was talking about, is that, oh, that isn't what we've ever done before, and therefore we can't do it. And I'm pretty sure that the Agile Manifesto says something pretty early on about learning new ways. And it didn't say we've learned all the new ways there are. It says we're continuing to learn new ways. We are learning new ways. And that's really what we're supposed to be doing. And if Agile means anything, maybe it is we are learning new things as we go.
And to that point,
just to clarify, by the way, I totally agree with that. Just to clarify, to show it's a little bit worse, those weren't new things. I was talking about like making stories small and making them end-to-end value, and not having a back end and a front end engineer. But
Oh yeah.
Chad, I think what you brought up is one of the big holes I see in the entire Agile industry, if you will. We always talk about successes, and the thing is that I found after the classes and coaching and consulting that if you teach people how to use lack of success as a learning example to get better, you have all the things we talk about: happy teams, productive communications. One of the things I used in most of my classes was a game where no matter what they did, they failed in the first sprint, the first iteration. Not because I set it up that way, maybe a little bit, but because they couldn't interact with individuals. They had to play games with who was on top. And after we had a big conversation, a big retro, I would say to them, I was like, how did you get here? I didn't put you here. I just let you play a game. How did you get here? And they forced themselves to talk about with each other. And then they went back and they knocked it out of the ball field, the second and third iteration. Why was that? And we had a big conversation about that. About half of a 2-day class was spent in this game. And it became as we listened, we learned, and we valued our mistakes to figure out what we can and cannot do better. And yet I do not see that as part of the mainstream Agile industry. We always want to talk about this success and that success. Okay, so you got two matches lit in a swamp. That's what the perception is I get. We got to figure out how to drain the swamp and light those fires.
So, Mike, for years and years and years, Rebecca Worfsbrock, and she wrangled me into this. I was a shepherd for experience reports. We tried to get people to talk about when they failed, and they either could not get permission from their companies, or they needed to somehow say, we learned enough that we turned it into success. So you can do this in a small environment, in a workshop. But I think that talking publicly about failure, even though that's what we need as an industry, that's really, really hard.
Well, that's why I use my games to do that. I use my games to put up a non-threatening environment where everybody could reveal themselves, and you could have executives and vice presidents and presidents and trainees and coders all come together, and they get put in this big mosh pit, and guess what they got to do? They got to try to get it done, and they fail. And it suddenly is a great equalizer. And because it's basically doing tasks that we do have assigned to 5-year-olds, they have this free place to start expanding how they manage failure. And by the way, the game I used the Scrum game out of Belgium.
Mosh pit. I knew I recognized you from somewhere else.
No, not me.
You know, there's this great book. If people haven't read it, I highly recommend it. Also get a big thing of Advil to go with it. But Principles of Product Development Flow, second edition, why that's important. Second edition.
Renderson.
There's 10 amazing points in it. One that I remember really well, having to do with innovation. There's queuing theory and graphs and all that. But what it eventually comes down to is, if you want to be, people think, oh, how do we know we're going to be successful? Have you figured this out? Have you got a good plan? Whatever. If you know you're going to be successful, guess what? That's because you're copying something that's already existing.
Right.
So there's no innovation there. Now, on the other side, work with me here. If you know it's not going to work, then don't freaking do it. Right? So it turns out that the sweet spot is 50%. You can't know it's 50%. But if you feel like a little scared it's going to work or not, but also you feel like there's a good chance, that's the sweet spot. But convincing companies to do that is super hard, but that's where the value is. And basically this is, you know, it's what Mike was saying, is that you learn a lot from failure. And if you don't have those failures, you're not going to get the success either. You're going to get a certain level of success, but it's going to be like copycat success, not actual success.
Well, when Ron and I were doing 5-day XP developer courses, we would always engineer that they would fail around the 3rd or 4th iteration and get nothing done. We ran 90-minute iterations. And so we made it so that in the 3rd or 4th iteration, they would fail. Everybody would fail. They wouldn't get anything done. Because it turns out that in software development, we're always failed. You know, things don't work until they do. You know, and sometimes we're just holding on by our fingernails to do that. And if you don't know how to recover from failure, you're not going to be able to get to success, because failure happens all the time. Sometimes it's stupid things we do, and sometimes, you know, the wrong gamma ray hits something in the computer and things don't work. You know, so failure is built into has to be built into our thinking. We're fail most of the time. You know, my tests fail a lot until they don't. And when I'm working on something, I got a red bar, you know, until I get to the green one. And learning how to dig yourself out of that failure is really one of the most important skills you can help a team learn, because they're going to fail. And you'd like to fail a little bit than fail a whole lot. But you got to learn how to get back from that. And if it's like, oh, I did this thing they taught me and it didn't work, this won't work. Well, no, you got to learn how, you know, failure is part of it. Failure is part of life. And
it's kind of like the approach is like, we'll just keep pretending we're not failing because, you know, it doesn't work yet. Pretending until it gets so bad it blows up, and then we have to admit, because it's a crisis, that we need to do something different.
Yeah,
well, you know,
we did that.
We'll do better next
'70s
time.
Then they
and '80s.
get a new CEO and then claim that's all in the past.
Yeah, but we did that in the '70s and '80s. I mean, that's how we got to the point where these 17 cases got together and decided we're not going to do this anymore.
yeah.
Well, I don't think everybody's like gotten the message, unfortunately, Mike.
Well, that's a good area to ask why.
Well, I think if we
Hey, we could let Amy ask a question.
Hey, Amy, ask a question.
No,
I don't know. Does Amy need to ask a question? We're going to be going here to about 11 anyway. So Amy, ask a question. We may not answer it, but go ahead and ask it.
I am enjoying the debate because I'm learning so much from all. There's so much experience in this room. And I think everybody on the call is just dying to hear what you have to say next, because there's so much we can learn from you and your history. And I did want to open it up to the rest of the group, because I don't want to take all the time with my questions. You are inadvertently answering many of my questions on the list anyway, which I knew you would, because, you know, great minds think alike. So I do want to know if there's some burning questions from our audience, because they came here tonight to hear you, but also to have some of their questions answered. So I wanted to know if anyone wants to come off mute and ask a question of the panel. I'm sure they have no trouble answering, but if there's something specific that you're just dying to know from one of our panelists or all of them, I want you to have a chance to, because we have quite some time left, but I want to make sure that anybody who's attending tonight gets to ask some questions. So is there anybody that wants to ask something specific of someone or everyone? I want to open it up to the participants.
I would actually like to say something back to Mike, because
Okay.
I did not start failing at software projects until the 90s. And I find this very interesting. All the way through the 70s, I am an old programmer, right? I started writing code professionally in 1975 while I was still in school. And in my first job in 1977, I had many successes. I had to learn how to like the feedback I got, because we were not pairing at the time.
Right
But
there.
I had a lot of design review and code review. This is back with the Key Punch ladies. I mean, yeah. But we worked in very small increments of features. Partly that was because I was writing assembly language code, and I only had a page or two before I had to jump somewhere else. And you quickly learned that if you had to jump somewhere else, it was too freaking big. You could not test that. And now I have several failures where the general had to listen to the conference call, not actually talk on the conference call, but you know, maybe my anarchic mind took over that one. But I did not start to fail until the 90s, when I had all these requirements that were ridiculously large and so much oversight. As a project manager, I was supposed to oversee. And I distinctly remember having this conversation with my boss at the time. And I said, I don't understand what these people are doing. Why would I oversee them? Why would I not just make it easier for them to do their jobs? And that's a different. Go ahead, Damon. I didn't hear
I was
you.
just gonna say, if you'd like to later, talk about this and get it off your chest, I'd be happy to help.
So
No, I think what Johannes brought up is the attention to detail and the focus on the outcome of assembler coders. I was a very bad one, but I still did it. Was led to an overwhelming analysis of what the capabilities, limitations you had, and you did what you could, and you verified it. And you also probably chatted with your friends to have them go through the code reviews. And some of those code reviews were real growing up experiences. But we lost that.
I'm feeling
well,
a little.
We lost it when we got the PC, because then it became cheaper to get everybody their own machine rather than share machines or share enough collaboration to do the work right. Our management did not understand what was actually happening when we did not have enough machines because they were so big and so expensive. Right.
I think you're absolutely right, John. And I apologize if I was making it sound like everybody failed.
No, I just think I think we need to look at the history and understand where we were right and where we were not so right, and what we can do now.
I think what you're saying there is really important, and that a lot of the things that we knew back then, we have lost. You know, and one of the things I think that made XP so appealing to me was because I came from an environment in PL1 and COBOL, where we had a very, very strong emphasis in my organization on testing, because we did things that had huge impact. You know, I worked at General Motors on materials management, and if you shut down an assembly plant because you did something stupid, it was, you know, millions of dollars an hour. And so you did not do mistakes. So we had huge amounts of effort towards testing. You know, I had the ability to have test databases within my environment in TSO, and I could refresh them anytime I wanted to. And there's stuff that I had back in the mid 1980s that people don't even have today.
Right.
It's like I could test. And it's a thing I took with me every place I went after that was we have to figure out how to test. The reason I got onto C3 was because I made a really good impression to the manager of the payroll group, because the first thing I did at Chrysler was I worked on some little thing. And I said, how do we test this? And I had to go talk to Tom Hatfield, the head of in charge of payroll, because I was using payroll data. And it's like, okay, how do I get test information? It's like, well, we have some, but we haven't refreshed it in 3.5 years. And so I went off and rebuilt the test databases so I could test the little 10-line change I made to this program. You know,
Amy, were you saying something?
No, I was just, so I wanted to make sure that no one had a question before I selfishly ask a question. So is there anyone in the audience here who has a question for the panel? Just want to make sure you get what you need from tonight too.
Well, I was going to pick up on what Johanna said. So does the advent of like C and C++ and, you know, all these programming frameworks that have made it easier to do development, where you would assume that individual programmers would put out more and more code. You know, we spend less time writing basic stuff because now we're building a lot of business rules because we've got these really powerful frameworks that have so much capability. Do you think that has changed, you know, the gist of software development basically, and how teams kind of, you know, work if they're not, you know, focusing on 10 lines of assembly, but now, like, you know, we're just building hundreds and hundreds of lines of code, you know, constantly.
So I should probably not answer this, but I'm going to anyway. And Chet, you can fix me when I'm wrong. How about that?
Okay.
My experience from my time at Symbolics, where we had a whole lot of libraries, and then later on at Cognex, which was a machine vision system, where we also had a whole lot of libraries. We had scaffolding, and we built on top of it. But if the scaffolding did not work, we could not build on it. So one of the things I went to Symbolics. I started off life as a developer. They hired me in as a tester because they said I was too stupid to be a developer because I didn't know Lisp. So my early Lisp programs looked a lot like Fortran. However, they asked me to test the scheduler. Now, if you know anything about garbage collection and the scheduler in a Lisp-based operating system, you know that that's almost an impossible task. So when I filed my first bug reports, all of the developers said to me, how could somebody so stupid find something like this? And that's because I was looking at the scaffolding. If you don't understand the scaffolding and you don't understand, if you cannot trust the scaffolding, you cannot trust anything else. So I don't know enough about the frameworks right now. I am sure Chet can probably tell me all kinds of stuff about it. But for me, it goes back to, can we trust everything we are building on top of? And that's a principle I learned back, you know, in 1974, but I think it's still accurate now. And that goes to Chet's idea about tests. If we cannot easily test what we're doing, we have no hope of actually creating products that people like and
Yeah.
will use.
The code and hope is not a strategy.
No.
My theory is that the software environments over time change in such a way that things become very easy to do. Things start out hard to do, and then we find ways of making them easier. And then we move to some other environment where everything is hard again. And then we have to figure out how to make that easy and up and up and up. Because, building a user interface in CICS was dead simple. And today, building a user interface is hard because there's 37 different frameworks you have to use. And hopefully someday that will collapse back down so that problem becomes easily solved again, and we can get solving other kinds of problems. But that's kind of how the world works, I think.
Oh my God, I just remembered. I was thinking this the other day. So as Mike mentioned earlier, I'm working on a virtual reality game. You know what? Video games have to run at a solid 72 frames per second, at least in VR, and on computers, they go up to 120 and stuff. But they have to be at a solid frame rate. There's no dropping, there's no slowing down, solid frame rate. And the environment for developing video games is generally amazing, right? It's just amazing. So maybe we should move into the video game world and just have apps there, just not video games.
Yeah.
By the way, I feel like I'm the youngest person here. I think I need to establish my chops. At one point, I did write one assembly program. It was in Z80. I got paid for it. It was a VT102 emulator. So I just wanted to get that out there.
Thank you, Damon. Hey, Rick, I'm hoping, did you get an answer to what you asked?
It was an observation. It was more of a, I don't know necessarily, but it was more of a, do you think the JavaScript frameworks or the .NET or the C++ libraries, whatever, did that sort of change the way development tended to happen in teams? And that was kind of like the notion of the question, but it's fine.
Okay.
Well, I will say, that someone much wiser than me once said, that history does not repeat itself, but it does rhyme. And I think that's kind of where we are is that, yeah, the tools we have today rhyme with tools we had 20 years ago, and we'll move through some other thing. I think right now we're in a place of chaos where there's all these frameworks, and just being able to put together an environment in which a developer can actually work is hard. If you start with a clean machine, and go to build all that stuff up one piece at a time, the chances of doing that successfully is pretty low. And that the thing that saves us is you get to copy somebody else's most places, and that tells us that these environments are way too complicated right now, and hopefully we're going to get to some synthesis to make those environments simpler.
Hey,
I'd like to. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I heard a question come across my bar here about Agile in out of development in IT situations, and I dealt with a lot of that. How do we make our IT organization more productive? Blah 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 blah. And it comes down to this: you got to understand the outcome, and the IT organization needs to understand that in order to deliver the outcome that the customer wants, they have to ask the questions in such a way that the customer realizes how little the IT organization understands their business and how little the customer understands. So the IT understands their business and how little they understand the IT, and they got to get together and collaborate and manage it. By the way, that works beyond IT organizations. And it all boils back down to, this is something I want to have, I need to have, I got to have. It looks like this. And let's go from there and see what we can tease out of these conversations. And then you go back and you write little bitty chunks of code that said, oh, is this what you were talking about in this statement? That's the essence of what we do, folks. And you can do that in a business situation. I work with people who develop stories for visual gaming. That's how you do it. But there was did I answer that person's question? I hope.
I'm not sure who asked it.
Yes, we got a yes. We got a
Yes.
yes. Let me add
All
one
right.
more thing to what Mike said, which I agree with every bit of that. Is that the way we get better is we shorten the feedback loop. We learn faster. You know, we cannot predict the future better. All we can do is learn faster. And I think a lot of what Mike was just saying there was how do we learn faster? Both sides of any interaction.
I'd like
They
to
seem
add
like a
something
strange
to it.
connection, but this
I wanna
reminds me
add
of something.
something
Oh,
to
go
this
ahead.
too.
Go
I
ahead.
wanna Jump in.
Yeah.
You know, as Mike was saying that, I was thinking, oh, and I know where I saw a really great example, not just of the fast feedback and what Mike was saying, but also of working together as a whole system at multiple levels. And what I'm thinking of is if you go back and watch the Apollo 13 movie, which you can probably get on Netflix or wherever, if you go back and watch that movie and really watch it, you'll see that at every step of the way, there's an outcome that they're driving towards. There's a new problem to solve. You know, there was the problem of the air exchangers, and there was the problem of the how much electricity they had, how much power, you know, and stuff like this. Every step of the way in that movie, they were solving real problems. Everybody was orchestrating what they could do, and they were centralizing it to the degree needed to solve the problem. And it's really a great example of how a bigger system can work together with smaller teams doing the parts they know. And one of the interesting side notes about that movie is when Ron Howard wanted to make the movie, he had to go around persuading a lot of people. And I remember there was an interview with him where he really had to talk the astronauts and people into wanting to be part of it. He got Jim Lovell to, participate. He was the guy who was the commander. And the big deal there is his whole thing was to capture the real problems and the real actions people did before it all faded from living memory. Okay, because it was not that long after Apollo 13 that he was trying to get it made. And I think it, because he wanted there to be a real record that made sense and that captured the reality of it. Anyway.
There's another example, Nancy, I don't think it's from that movie, but they had a problem with the LEM.
Yeah.
Because the GE engine failed, their backup was 20% less power. And if you want to understand what iterative, what?
Yeah, they had to use it as a lifeboat, and it wasn't designed for that.
Yeah,
it was designed for
these two guys overnight grabbed a refrigerator box.
Yep.
Okay. Put it in the office, and the next morning they came in and used broomsticks to explain the design to the engineers and the astronauts and how they're going to take the seats out, and they're going to have these guys stand in zero gravity. And everybody said, well, that looks good. They made 2 minor changes, and then they shipped the refrigerator box off to the fabricators. Yep. To me, that is the essence of Agile, crisis averted by practicality.
And another thing, Johanna mentioned early on about leadership. If you watch in that movie, it's a perfect illustration of how leadership shifts from one place to the next as the center of the problem moves around. Because they have that guy, the launch controller, Gene Kranz, he's orchestrating everything, but he's not trying to tell everybody their job. He's letting these different engineers take the lead as the center of the problem moves to their area. It's really interesting how that happens.
Well, I think if you look,
can do that, and the successful ones do it today.
If you look at the U.S. space program as a whole, you'll see a very agile, iterative approach. If you think about the movies I watched growing up of people going to the moon or Mars or Saturn or wherever the heck it is they went to, it was a Big Bang approach, right? You build a great big rocket, you get in it, you fly to wherever you're going, and whatever happens, happens. And you make it back or you don't. But that isn't how we did it. We started out using a very iterative, incremental approach. You know, we had the biggest rockets we had, because it turns out our rockets weren't very big because our atomic bombs were better than the Russians. And we did this thing where we launched one guy and we had to go straight up and down. Then we did that a couple of times, and we had a guy go around. Then we had this and that, and finally went to 2 guys and did this, and 3 guys and blah, 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 and did all that to learn all the technical things we did. And so one thread of the iterative approach was about learning the technology, and they would not move to the next thing until they had the thing before nailed down.
Yep. And
the other part of it, which was also a very agile approach, goes back to something that Gus Grissom said in The Right Stuff, which is no Bucks, no Buck Rogers. Because, you know, everything they did was on TV.
Yep.
So the people who were paying the bills, us, could see what was happening and maintain the flow of money to be able to do this stuff. You know, and as my buddy Ron says, nobody ever failed because they shipped software too frequently. The thing what gets us into trouble is not showing the people with the money that we're delivering value.
So I like to go in a slightly different direction. You know, call me a space shot if you want.
Go ahead,
But,
Damon, and then I
You
want
want to talk about submarines? I'll talk about submarines.
There was this guy, some keynote, quite a curmudgeon though, also pretty funny, at this conference that I went to called Agile and Beyond. And he sort of objected to the term and beyond. And he said, what did he say? He said, you know, before you go beyond, maybe you should try actually doing Agile first. I think his name was Hendrickson.
I think it was Jeffries who said that.
Was it?
But I was about a foot and a half away from him.
No, there was 2 crazy people up on the stage.
Yeah, there's 2 crazy of us. Yes. Yeah. Yes, you can't go beyond Agile until you've been to Agile.
Yeah, all right. So where I'm going with that is, you know, Amy's question earlier about, you know, is Agile fading away or whatever, to be replaced by what? What is it? If there was some other thing, we'd be talking about that today, right? But the thing is, there is no other thing. And I don't know when the idea of technical excellence is going to fade away, or the idea of reflecting from time to time and changing behavior is going to fade away. I don't know when, you know, what is it going to fade away that it makes sense to trust people? You know, you could go through step by step, but one of those things going to fade away. I don't think they're going to fade away. So,
that's a perfect segue, Damon, because that's what I want to. We talked about the past and we've been talking about the present. And I do want to talk about the future because selfishly, I'm an Agile coach for whatever that means. I've struggled with what it actually means, what I'm supposed to do every day. I feel like I fail continuously. But there's this notion that, you know, we're supposed to be coaching this Agile mindset thing. And I really want to hear from the panel about, you know, what you've seen in the past and the present. Where do you think this is going? Because there was a presentation that I forget who did, it was maybe Ed Martin or something at the WOW conference 2015. He presented 40 Agile concepts in 40 minutes or something like that. And there was all these options when you talk about agility. So what really is agility? And for someone like me who's coaching Agile, I get stuck in coaching frameworks. And that's not Agile. Yes, please, because I want to know what does my career look like 20 years from now? Am I going to be an Agile coach? Am I a framework coach? Should I just go, you know, do something else? Because I feel like it's not the intended purpose of my role. And I'd like to know what you all think about that. So go ahead, Mike, please.
And I'm going to quote Charlie Parker. For those of you who don't know who Charlie Parker is, I'm very sorry. Charlie Parker is the finest saxophonist ever to play the instrument. And he said, first, you got to learn your instrument. You got to learn what you do and how you're doing it. And then you got to practice, and get better. My practice, by the way, is a series of incremental failures to get to a point of perfection. And then When you're finally ready to get out there and go on the stage, forget all that, just play. That's your job as a coach, to get everybody so they can walk out there and they can say, yeah, we can do this.
I would
I've
challenge
seen
you just a little bit, not Mike, but Amy, because I agree with everything Mike said, is I think we want to make sure we know the difference between being an Agile coach and being an Agile cheerleader.
Mm.
If you think about what a coach does versus what a cheerleader does, a coach understands the game that is being played on the field and what every player is doing, right? And they can teach them how to do their job. A cheerleader stands on the sideline and goes, yay, yay, and it doesn't matter whether the game is football or basketball or basket weaving. I can cheer no matter what the sport is. And so I found an awful lot of folks who are really Agile cheerleaders. They don't understand the game that is being played on the field. And so my challenge to folks who really want to be good Agile coaches is, yes, you got to know about coaching, but you also have to understand what you're coaching. If a team is struggling with testing, can you help them with that testing? Can you help them with refactoring? Can you help them do the technical things? Because if you can't do the technical things, then you're really just a cheerleader. Because, insert favorite coach's name here, they can go on to the field of play, whatever that is, and talk to a player about how they blocked, how they took that shot, how they did this. And a good coach knows how to do that. And I have seen that done by people who are amazing at it. If you want to learn what coaching is, sit with Ward Cunningham when he's working with somebody on a technical problem. Because I actually sat with Ward one day while he was coaching a high school student to debug an Apache web server. And Ward never touched the keyboard. All he did was ask a little question here or there. And very gently, at the end of an hour or so, this high school student, 16, 17-year-old kid, had solved this problem.
I think there's also the idea of a coaching team, right? So you've got, I'm not going to do sports, all right, because I get confused about that. Is it
It's okay.
Is it fifth down or what's going on? But
Offside
anyway,
rule?
you got a coaching team, right? So you got some folks that are more on the technical side. Then you've got folks that are going to coach folks about how do we reduce our initiatives in progress, right? So business coaching, business-oriented coaching. We got team coaching. We got the technical side, but then there's also this thing of no matter what's going on in the code, if you've got people in the organization that don't trust other people, that don't understand other parts of the organization, there's all this human factors part as well, right? So it really depends on what kind of coach are you going to be, which field are you going to play on, right? To get as close to sports as I dare.
Well, and let me ask you this question, Amy, and I'm not asking for an answer on this call, but if you are looking out for your career, which I think you absolutely should, deciding which field or fields you want to coach on is really, really important. So I don't do team-based coaching for the technical stuff anymore. I only start with backlogs and initiatives, and that means I move up and down, but I don't do the in-depth team coaching that my colleagues here do. I start with why is management asking us to do 500 things when we cannot even finish one in 2 weeks? Now, I can help a little bit with how do you get can you finish 2 or 3 things inside of 2 weeks? But all that other stuff, that's not in my wheelhouse. It's not interesting to me. I am much more likely to attack the problem and go up, because that's the kind of coaching I do. So once you decide where your field of play is, or whatever Chet said, right? What field are you on? I think that was a really good question. That's where you can say, I want that kind of a career for now, and then I want a different kind of a career for later. And if I can offer one more piece of advice, I always recommend to people that they never coach until they have done that job. So don't coach Scrum Masters until you've been a Scrum Master. Don't coach program managers or whatever you're going to call those people who are trying to facilitate several teams to one business objective until you have done that, right? Because you don't understand the pressure that all those people feel until you've tried to do it. Now, a lot of people tell me I'm nuts. Fine.
It's true, but it's the good nuts. One other thought on that, as far as longevity, Chet could probably correct me on this, but I think crystal methodology. Sorry, I didn't mean to pause there. There's something in my throat. I think 1992. I don't know if there was something before that that was sort of compatible with the Agile Manifesto, but that was 30 freaking years ago. Yeah. 30 years. Like, it's not that hard. Come on, folks. Why are we still here? Because it's not actually difficult, not really, and it's not against what Chet said. All the stuff he said is absolutely true. But actually, come on, the concept is super easy. Why has it taken 30 years? Because a lot of it is, this is a movement. Like many other movements, I'm not going to name any because I'll get myself in trouble. But it's more of a social movement, and social movements can take a long time. So guess what? You've got job security for the foreseeable future.
I will say one.
Being a systems dynamic problem.
Well, you know,
it's a culture problem. I mean, we are talking about changing from a resource efficiency, a cost accounting based culture to a flow efficiency, collaborative culture. Everything in the organization pushes that away, right? This is why Denning's idea of the virus thing, or whatever that is so compelling, because that's what all of the rewards, all of the way we report our money is focused on individual efficiency and utilization. Chet, I
agree. Yes, that's absolutely true. Let me say one more thing about this, which is it takes longer to get to where we want to go than we thought. And I always remind people that it took the Israelites 40 years of wandering around in the desert to get to the promised land. And they had a way better coach than any of the teams out here now have.
So I said I wouldn't get into anything that would get me in trouble. And Chet is like, I don't have a problem with
Let
that.
Chet do it. That's fine, David. Yeah.
Oh.
Go ahead, Nancy.
I was going to say, Chet's angling for an invitation to our 40th birthday party.
That's right. Of course.
I'll be sitting here in my basement in Georgia, probably. So.
That's okay. We don't have a dress code.
We only have about 5 minutes left, unfortunately, because I could sit here all night with you all. I think you've been just so wonderful, and I'm so glad you came to share with us. I hope you all will come back, but I want to just open it up one more time to all the people that are hanging out with us until the very end. Are there any questions that you have that haven't been answered in chat, or that you have directly for one of the panelists? I want to make sure that we've gotten to as much as we can tonight before they leave us.
Somebody says Moses wouldn't stop for directions. He had directions on these tablets. He just didn't follow it.
The manifesto.
points on it.
Can I
5
make an
minutes, I can
observation?
bring up IntelliJ and we can write some code for a few minutes.
I'm open to whatever
Oh,
you all want
boy.
to do because no one has any questions I see. So if nobody else has any questions, we can keep chatting until 9 o'clock is when we usually adjourn. But I just want to make sure
9
that
o'clock, that's my
you all-
bedtime.
I
I
just want to
figured.
observe
I
Amy,
mean, you know,
Amy,
yeah.
that, Chet, you're not helping out with the typecasting of programmers being in your basement. I think you could have like glossed that over.
I have a lovely basement
This
here.
is true. It's
Nice basement.
Yeah,
I
it's
got
very
big
nice.
windows.
No
I got
light.
big windows over here. See?
It's
windows.
beautiful. I'm just
All right. I have my lovely
Thank
glass
you, Damon.
whiteboard over there.
Yeah, I don't think this
I
is
usually have a
helping.
cat on my lap when I'm doing this.
I
So
don't
he
think
wandered
that's
off.
helping, actually, describing
Yeah.
how wonderful it is to be in the basement. But
It's a lovely basement. It's a lovely basement. I could
How
take
about
it on a
shameful
tour.
plugs? Are any of you writing books? Doing anything coming up that you want to shout out to the group? Is there
Yeah,
anything you're
I-
attending? Please.
I have books. I have books. I always have books.
oh, she
No.
has, how many books do you have? Like
You
30,
have
40,
about
50?
50, Johanna. You got to give the rest of us a chance.
No,
No,
right? Slow down.
I think only about 18 right now. So
Oh,
but if you are looking to figure out how to help your managers understand what their jobs are, the Modern Management Made Easy books. I price them at $9.99 each as ebooks, so that that price would not be an issue. And I offer a bundle on LeadPub. So the Modern Management Made Easy books. And that's all about how you have a half a chance of getting agility into the organization so the teams can actually finish their jobs. And I'm finally finishing the consulting book. So yeah.
I
Let
put my
let me
first-
give you my piece of advice about working with your manager. You can put this into the next book. I always tell people that your manager's job is to help you. Your manager's job is to help you, and you need to treat them that way. And if you do that, every now and then you will confuse them enough that they actually will.
Best quote
Pure
of the night.
Chettism.
Amy, I put the
Yeah.
first of my 18 books. There's only one.
Oh,
but
good.
First of my
Okay.
18 books in the chat. I'm working on the other
Perfect.
17 now.
Okay. Well,
So
you know,
Amy,
if
I'm
you want
not
help,
writing.
yeah,
I'm
you're
I'm not
writing.
actually working on anything. One was enough. I'm good.
Tell us the title of it, Damon. Come on.
Oh, I put it in the chat, but it's called Professional Coaching for Agilists.
Okay, well, it's good because on the recording, people don't see the chat.
Oh, good point.
So
Oh, well, in that case, it's, there we
Oh,
go.
yes,
always
please
got it
show
in
shameless promotion, shameless
Yes,
promotion.
Shameless plug. That's what I was looking for. Shameless
That's
plug.
right.
That's right.
I didn't think I had to hold mine.
Oh,
up,
there's some
but
shame.
Better do it.
Mine-
Come on,
Mine's
Mike.
called,
You said.
mine's called Agile Methods for Safety Critical Systems. It's actually 2 books. Brian and I did an initial one, which is an introduction to, this is about Agile for software and hardware with specific discussion about medical devices. So the first one is an introduction. The second book in the series is about case studies. So it gives examples of real companies building medical devices and how they came to the problem and what they did about it. And it's a huge variety of examples, very different, some.
I can testify. I've read it. It's really good. I've read the first one. It's really good. It's a bit of a heart stopper. Oh, wait, it's not a
No.
heart stopper. Yeah,
Damon.
it's good. It's good.
It's a good book.
Good book.
Anyway, it's examples because I really think people learn best by seeing examples and hearing people's real stories about what they encountered. And one of the things I like about a lot of the case studies is that not every one of them, but some of them really had a disappointment, a serious setback that may have derailed the whole thing, but then they came up with something practical to deal with it. So it's very real world that way.
Amy,
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I'm probably the only one here not going to write a book, but I would like to give some suggestions for people for reading. books
Sure,
that I have found
please.
outside the Agile cubbyhole.
Yes.
And they deal with things like Risk. There's a team of teams, and Risk by McChrystal. I'm reading Risk right now, and it is a ground shaker. It's for people who want to get to understand how risk is in the 21st century. It's a good place to start, and a disciplined method for handling it. There's another book that I like that I'm just chewing through again. It's called The Courageous Follower. And it is about the power of the follower to push through the goodness of the world. And I think what I've learned in my years is reading too much inside the Agile discipline gets to be an echo box. You got to spread yourself out. Who else is dealing with complex problems? Who else has had failures and successes? And I can just see that like one of the things that's killing us is we're really inbred. We're not cross-pollinating with other worlds. And the one thing that I would say is that there is some interesting stuff in the military. If you do Agile in the military, there is a compendium of very good practical approaches to it. I don't know how many of you had dealt with the military in the 21st century, but they're probably the best leadership models and the best Agile models that you can bring back and tone down, and put them in shape. But I'm retired. I hope you guys feel kind enough to ask me to give my opinion at times, but I will give you all bad news. And this is for you, Chester, and you already know this, Johanna, is that you can't retire. This is in your blood. My wife was asking what I was reading. After I listed out the 6 books I'm currently reading, she said, "You're not retired. You're just going to get into this followership thing." And I might. I'm not sure.
Well, I love
it.
My example of retirement is Jeffrey's, and I believe today he probably published the 178th article in his series about writing a program, writing the game Asteroids. He's writing a version of Asteroids, the old game with the rocket ship and asteroids and stuff. And I think he's on 170 something in the articles. Let me say one more thing about what Mike just said. That one of the cases that Steve Denning has in the Age of Agile is General McChrystal, and talking about how they had to change what they were doing and to move to a very agile approach in Afghanistan. And so yeah, that's things where we're trying to learn from, and Steve is pushing on that, and I have some pretty close contact with some folks who are military folks, and we get a lot of cross-pollination between what they're doing and what I'm doing. And I think you're absolutely right. There's a lot of really interesting things to be learned from that. One of the great things I have stumbled into over the past few years is an interesting conference that I now help organize in Lisbon, Portugal. And one of the components of this is Agile Human Factors, which is about how decisions are made and how you move information through an organization. And the first year we did it, we actually did that session that day at an Air Force base in Portugal. And we had members of the Portuguese Special Forces sitting at each table to facilitate the discussions. Because if you want to learn about planning and about debriefing, those people know about it. we had a lovely presentation by a flight instructor, and they talked about that we do 2 hours of planning for every hour of flight and 2 hours of debrief and retrospective for every hour of flight. And, if you're really interested in learning from what you're doing, that's how you go about doing it.
We're at our time box. I don't want to stop him, but you're all welcome to go. I hope you'll join us for our first meeting in the new year in January. We're going to start a brand new year, which we're super happy about, but this was an awesome way to close out our 20th anniversary. I really appreciate the panel being here. Everyone is welcome to stay or go. I can hang out for a little while. We usually hang till 9 and do some networking and share job needs and leads and things like that. So if anyone has something that, are they looking for some work or they want to share some work, let's do that now, and then we can keep going with the panel. So does anybody have anything they'd like to share? Are you looking for work? Do you have something? Is there any events going on in our community you want to share with everyone before you go? I'll just open the floor.
I want to share something.
Please, Nancy, yeah, go ahead.
Well, this is a little bit before we do the needs and leads, but I just wanted to put a plug that Agile New England is looking for more sponsors, and you can write to us. You write to sponsorship@agilenewengland.org, and that's the email. That'll come to me, and I'll share it with the other board members. I'm acting sponsorship chair for the time being, but we want to have a few more sponsors that will help us getting going with our in-person events again. And we would like to consider what do I want to say? Reinstituting our conferences. COVID kind of squashed that away for a time, but we're done. And we want to think about bringing them back, but it would help if we build up our sponsors. So that's it. Okay.
All right. Awesome. Yeah, I'll open it up, but if not, thank you all for attending. We're going to hang out for a little bit and chat, but you're free to go. We appreciate it. You'll see the recording very shortly on the website. All right. Thank you all so much. We hope to see you all again. Yes, we hope to see all the panelists again. We loved having you.
Thank you.